The man who runs the Elvis Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas has been doing this for 20 years. He moved there because Las Vegas, in the early 2000s, was a city where a working-class entertainment concept could support a reasonable life. Couples from Ohio and Texas and Michigan and Georgia wanted to get married with an Elvis impersonator presiding, and Las Vegas was where that happened, and there were enough couples with that specific dream that it was possible to build a business around it. At his peak, he was conducting 6 or 7 ceremonies a day. Small, joyful, slightly absurd, genuinely meaningful to the people who chose them. Brides in chapel veils and grooms in rental tuxedos who had saved for a year to come to Vegas and wanted their wedding to feel like something they would remember. He knew their names by the end of each ceremony. He shook the groom's hand at the door. He felt, for 20 years, that he was part of what made the city what it was. In 2025, he does 6 or 7 a week. He has not changed his prices. The chapel is still there. The rhinestone jumpsuit still fits. Elvis is still available. The problem is not what he is offering. The problem is that the couples who used to come have, in measurable and accelerating numbers, stopped coming. In 2025, Las Vegas recorded its largest drop in visitors in more than a decade, nearly 8%. Uber drivers sat idle at the airport for hours, waiting for rides that used to come every few minutes. Chefs at strip restaurants were told to reduce their hours because the foot traffic no longer justified a full kitchen crew. The city that had built its identity around the proposition that everyone could afford to feel special was, by verifiable numbers, losing the people who had made that proposition real. Here is the part that is supposed to surprise you. The casino revenues went up. In the same year that Las Vegas lost nearly 8% of its visitors, the gambling take increased. The hotels made more money. The Strip reported stronger quarterly earnings. The companies that owned the casinos told their investors that the business was healthy, and they were not lying. The business was healthy. They needed fewer customers to generate more revenue because the customers they kept were spending vastly more than the customers they lost. Las Vegas in 2025 was simultaneously a city in decline and a cash machine in overdrive. The Elvis impersonator doing 6 weddings a week instead of 6 a day is not a coincidence that lives alongside this fact. He is a direct consequence of it. This is the story of how that happened, why it was allowed to happen, and what it means when a city that was built for everyone decides, for financially rational reasons, that it is better off serving fewer people. How Las Vegas was built. To understand what Las Vegas has become, you need to understand what it was designed to be. And to understand what it was designed to be, you need to understand that the design was never about gambling at all. In 1905, Las Vegas was a railroad stop, a waypoint on the route between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, its population measured in hundreds, its surroundings offering no natural resources worth extracting, and a climate that discouraged the kind of permanent settlement that built other Western cities. The land was flat, the heat was extreme, and the water was scarce. What the desert offered was something more valuable than resources. It offered distance. Las Vegas was far enough from major population centers to allow activities those centers prohibited, and close enough to Los Angeles, which was growing faster than almost any city in the country, to be reachable for a weekend. Nevada legalized gambling in 1931, the same year that construction began on the Hoover Dam, 30 miles to the southeast, which would provide the electricity and water infrastructure that made large-scale desert development possible. The combination of legal gambling, the dam's power supply, and a workforce drawn to the construction site created the conditions for everything that followed. The early casinos of the 1940s were modest establishments serving a local working population. The transformation into a destination arrived from an unlikely direction: organized crime. Meyer Lansky and his associates had spent years operating illegal gambling operations across the eastern United States and Cuba. They understood casino economics at a level that legitimate business people of the era had not been required to develop. A casino requires customers, and customers require reasons to come. The gambling itself was not enough, because the house advantage in most casino games was known, which meant that anyone approaching rationally would understand they were likely to lose money. What kept people coming was not the odds. It was everything around the gambling: the spectacle, the luxury, the sense that you were somewhere different from where you normally lived. Bugsy Siegel's Flamingo, which opened in December 1946, established the template that would define Las Vegas for the next half-century. The hotel was extravagant by the standards of its time and its setting. The rooms were furnished in ways that working-class Americans in the 1940s had never experienced. The entertainment was first-rate. Performers with genuine celebrity, not local acts. The casino was efficient, and the calculation underlying all of it was precise. Spend aggressively on everything that brings people into the building and recover the investment through the gambling. The Flamingo lost money in its first months. The timing was wrong, the construction costs had been massive, and the opening was rushed. By the early 1950s, the Flamingo was enormously profitable. Siegel did not live to see this, having been murdered by his associates in June 1947, but the model he demonstrated became the foundation of an entire industry and an entire city. What followed in Las Vegas was the most deliberate application of the loss leader principle ever executed at urban scale. The entertainment was cheap or free. The shows were spectacular, and the tickets were accessible or included with a hotel stay. The food was abundant and reasonably priced. The rooms were priced to fill, not to maximize revenue per night. The whole visible apparatus of the Vegas experience, the production values, and the celebrity performers, and the all-you-can-eat buffets, and the free drinks at the slot machines was not the product. It was the mechanism for getting as many human beings as possible into proximity with the actual product, the gambling. The performers who played Las Vegas in its golden decades were the biggest names in American entertainment: Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack at the Sands, where they performed shows and sometimes improvised past midnight and gave audiences the sense that they were watching something unrepeatable. Elvis Presley's 1969 comeback at the International Hotel, which ran for months of sold-out performances and established a template for the Las Vegas residency that would define the city's entertainment model for decades. Wayne Newton, who performed thousands of shows across several decades and became so identified with Las Vegas that he became its unofficial patron saint, the figure who gave the city its personality in the minds of people who had never been there. These were not charity performances. Sinatra was not playing Las Vegas for the love of the desert. The calculation was the same one that had built the Flamingo. Spectacular entertainment at accessible prices fills theaters, which fills casinos, which generates revenue that pays for the entertainment, and then some. The talent was expensive. The economics still worked because the gambling revenue dwarfed every other line on the ledger. The audience for these shows was genuinely broad. A factory worker from Cleveland and the factory owner who employed him could, for a Las Vegas weekend, stay in the same hotel, eat at the same buffet, and watch the same performance from different parts of the same room. There was a democratic quality to the experience, not in a political sense, but in the sense that the pleasures of the place were genuinely available across a wide range of incomes. The slot machines started at a nickel. The blackjack tables had minimums that a working person could afford for a few hours. The free drinks kept coming regardless of how much you were spending. This is the city that the Elvis impersonator moved to. This is the implicit promise he understood when he opened his chapel. Las Vegas was a city where ordinary people came to feel extraordinary, and where the economics of that premise had sustained a community of workers and entertainers and small business owners for decades. He was part of a city that had been built to be for everyone. He was about to watch it be rebuilt for someone else. The corporate turn. The transition from mob-controlled to corporate-controlled Las Vegas began in the late 1960s when Howard Hughes, using the proceeds from selling his aviation business to the federal government, began purchasing strip properties through a series of transactions that casino regulators welcomed, an alternative to organized crime ownership. Hughes brought legitimacy. He also brought a different relationship to the properties, one more interested in asset accumulation than in the operational logic that had made the properties work. The full corporatization accelerated through the 1980s and 1990s as publicly traded casino companies replaced the previous ownership structures. MGM Grand, Caesars Palace, and eventually the consolidated entities that would become MGM Resorts International and Caesars Entertainment introduced a financial discipline to Las Vegas that the mob had never needed to exercise. Not because the mob was sentimental, but because the mob's accountability was internal and operational, measured in cash generation rather than in stock price, earnings per share, or return on invested capital. Steve Wynn, who opened the Mirage in 1989 and spent the following 2 decades building some of the most spectacular properties on the Strip, understood the original logic precisely. The volcano that erupted every hour in front of the Mirage could be watched from the sidewalk for free. Anyone could stop on Las Vegas Boulevard, watch the controlled explosion, hear the soundtrack, see the fire on the water, and walk away without spending a cent. Wynn understood that free spectacle attracted foot traffic, and foot traffic converted into gambling revenue. The volcano was the most expensive loss leader in the history of American entertainment, and it worked because the people it attracted walked directly into the casino. The dolphin habitat was open. The white tigers were visible. The free shows at Treasure Island, where pirate ships battled outside on the Strip twice a night, stopped traffic and moved bodies. All of it was free. All of it was, from a financial perspective, an investment in the mass market customer who would then, on some percentage of visits, gamble. Then 2 things happened that changed the strategic calculus permanently. First, Las Vegas became consolidated. MGM Resorts and Caesars Entertainment, through a series of mergers and acquisitions across 2 decades, came to control approximately 60 to 70% of the Strip between them. When a single market is controlled by 2 major players, the competitive pressure to win customers through aggressive pricing disappears. You do not need to make the experience affordable to prevent customers from going to a competitor when there are effectively no competitors. You price for the customers you want and let the customers you do not want find somewhere else to go. Second, the quarterly earnings pressure intensified as institutional investors became the dominant force in casino ownership. A casino owned by mobsters needs to produce cash. A casino owned by institutional investors needs to produce earnings per share, return on equity, comparable revenue growth, and a share price that justifies the capital allocated. The metrics are not the same. The difference between them produced a different set of strategic decisions. The insight that drove those decisions was simple and financially irrefutable. The most profitable customers are high-spending customers. The top 10% of gamblers generate a disproportionate share of gambling revenue. A high roller playing $50,000 a hand contributes more to the bottom line in one evening than 100 tourists playing minimum bet tables for a full weekend. If the objective is to maximize revenue per square foot of casino floor, the optimal strategy is not filling the space with as many people as possible. It is filling the space with as many high-spending people as possible and designing the experience so that high-spending customers feel valued and lower-spending customers feel, without anyone saying so explicitly, that this is not quite the right environment for them. The mechanisms of this transition are visible to anyone who has visited Las Vegas in the past decade compared to 2 decades before. The Mirage volcano has been removed. The Treasure Island pirates have been retired. The White Tigers are gone. In each case, the replacement was something that generates more revenue per visitor and requires less investment in the mass-market customer who might have watched the free show and gambled $50. Resort fees, which did not exist on the Strip before the late 1990s, are now universal and expensive. These are mandatory daily charges added to your room bill, covering services previously included in the room rate: pool access, fitness center access, Wi-Fi, and in some cases, simply the administrative privilege of receiving a functional key card. The average resort fee now runs between $50 and $60 per night, added to a room rate that is itself significantly higher than 20 years ago in real terms. Valet parking was always charged. Self-parking, historically free, began disappearing in 2016 when MGM introduced charges. Caesars followed quickly. Every other major operator followed Caesars. The reasoning was explicit in investor communications. If customers will absorb the charge, charge it. The minibar in some Strip properties is now pressure sensitive. If you pick up a bottle of water to look at it and replace it, the charge appears on your bill anyway. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate mechanism for extracting additional revenue from customers who are already inside the building and whose alternatives require leaving, which is inconvenient enough that many choose to absorb the charge instead. Taken individually, each of these changes is a rational pricing decision. Taken together, they describe a systematic restructuring of the Las Vegas experience away from the model that built the city toward a model designed to extract maximum revenue from a narrower, wealthier customer base. The Formula One moment. In November 2023, Las Vegas hosted its first Formula One Grand Prix, and the way the city hosted it made visible in a single concentrated spectacle what Las Vegas has decided to be. Formula One is not a mass-market sport. It is an aspirational luxury product, a racing series that has spent the past decade successfully rebranding from motorsport for enthusiasts into an exclusive global event for the wealthy class that moves between Cannes and Monaco and Dubai and New York, attending things that cost a great deal to attend. The demographics of Formula One viewership skew sharply toward higher incomes. The costs of attending a Grand Prix in person have always been high, and the Las Vegas race was designed to be the most expensive iteration of an already expensive series. The circuit was built directly on the Strip, transforming the central commercial artery of the city into a racetrack. Construction began months before the event. Grandstands rose along the most recognizable street in the country. Barriers were installed. The traffic patterns that thousands of service workers depend on for their daily commutes were disrupted for weeks before the race and for days after it. Businesses along the circuit watched foot traffic decline during the construction period, returned only partially during the event itself because the event's pricing was calibrated for people who were not their typical customers. Small restaurant operators near the circuit reported that the weekend of the race was one of their worst of the year. The tourists attending the Grand Prix were staying in hospitality packages that included food. They did not wander into the local restaurant on the corner because wandering was not part of their experience. They were in a curated environment that captured their spending entirely. The city hosted a massive, profitable event, and the economic spillover to the businesses that had always served the city's broad tourist base was minimal to negative. But none of this is what makes the Formula One arrangement the defining symbol of what Las Vegas has become. Las Vegas sits on flat desert terrain. The grandstands erected along the Strip were visible for blocks in every direction. The race itself, with cars traveling at nearly 200 miles per hour through the center of the most famous commercial district in the world, produced a spectacle that could in principle be glimpsed from streets, bridges, and elevated positions by people who had not paid for a ticket. People who lived in Las Vegas, people who worked there, people who had helped build the experience that the Grand Prix was now capitalizing on. The organizers, in collaboration with the casino operators, who are the primary financial beneficiaries of the event, addressed this by covering the windows of Strip buildings overlooking the circuit with opaque film and installing visual barriers on highway overpasses near the track. Consider what that decision represents. The residents of Las Vegas, who endured months of construction disruption and who received no direct financial benefit from a sporting event priced far beyond the reach of most of their household budgets, were physically prevented from seeing the spectacle being constructed in their own city. The skyline they live under was temporarily redesigned as a closed venue for a private event. The view from the overpass, on which a service worker commutes to the casino where she makes beds and clears chips, was blocked so that the unobstructed sightline from inside the grandstand, which cost several $1,000s to occupy, could remain exclusive. This is not a minor operational detail. It is a statement of who the city considers its constituency. The Elvis impersonator who runs the wedding chapel near the Strip watched the barriers go up in October. He watched the opaque film applied to the windows of the building across the street from his chapel. He watched the grandstands rise. He watched the race weekend arrive and fill the city with people who were not his customers and who did not need what he offers. He watched it leave. He went back to waiting for the couples who are coming less and less frequently. The K economy. There is a framework for what has happened to Las Vegas, and understanding it is essential because it is not only about Las Vegas. Economists describe the current structure of the American economy using the letter K. The shape is precise, a vertical line that at a certain point splits into two diverging branches, one pointing upward and one pointing downward. The upward branch represents the economic trajectory of the top quintile of income earners, growing wealth, rising asset values, strong discretionary spending, and continued access to premium goods and services that have improved in quality as they have risen in price. The downward branch represents the trajectory of everyone below a specific income threshold, stagnant wages, declining purchasing power relative to inflation, mounting household debt, and the progressive loss of access to experiences that a previous generation considered ordinary middle-class entitlements. The K economy explains apparent paradoxes in aggregate economic data. The stock market at all-time highs, while consumer sentiment surveys show historic pessimism. Gross domestic product growing, while the majority of households report feeling financially worse off than 5 years ago. Corporate earnings strong, while workers across multiple sectors report they cannot afford the basic costs of living in the cities where they work. These are not contradictions. They are accurate descriptions of the same underlying condition. The economy is performing well for the people on the upward branch of the K, and performing poorly for the people on the downward branch. Las Vegas is an almost perfect measuring instrument for the K economy because Las Vegas runs on discretionary spending. When people have money left over after necessities, they come to Las Vegas. When they do not come. The city is sensitive, in a way that most industries are not, to real-time changes in the discretionary spending capacity of different income groups. What the 225 data shows is the K economy made visible in real time. Credit card delinquency rates have risen sharply among lower-income households. The savings rate for households in the bottom 40% of the income distribution is effectively zero or negative, meaning these households are consuming more than they earn, financed by debt. Consumer confidence among households earning below the national median is near recessionary levels. Among households in the top quintile, confidence is strong. Asset values have continued to appreciate, and discretionary spending on premium experiences has continued to grow. The people on the downward branch of the K have reduced their Las Vegas visits because a Las Vegas visit is discretionary spending that requires a margin that many of them no longer have. The people on the upward branch have continued to come and, in some cases, have increased their spending because the premium version of the Las Vegas experience has improved specifically to serve them. The casino revenues went up because the math of the K economy worked in their favor. The casino operators did not create the K economy. They responded to it intelligently from a narrow business perspective. If the mass market is declining and the premium market is not, and your business can be redesigned to capture more of the premium market, that redesign is rational. No organization is obligated to serve customers who can no longer afford its prices. The entertainment economists who advised MGM and Caesars did not tell them to be indifferent to their communities. They told them to follow the money. The money was pointing at the wealthy. The problem is what following the money requires doing to the city that the money runs through. The people, the math, does not count. The Uber driver who has been operating in Las Vegas since 1991, has watched this transition across 34 years. He remembers when the airport queue was continuous, a pickup every few minutes, fares distributed reliably across a broad base of arriving commercial flight passengers. The people who took Ubers to the Strip were a specific type of traveler, budget-conscious, arriving on commercial flights, staying in mid-range hotels, spending a few $100s across a few days. The airport has not shrunk. More aircraft arrive than ever, but the composition of arrivals has shifted. More private jets, specifically, arrive than at any previous point in the city's history. The private jet arrivals do not take Ubers. They are met by the hotel's car service. They move through a different part of the airport infrastructure entirely, one that the Uber driver does not reach. The commercial flight passenger who needs a ground transfer is still there, but in declining numbers. When those customers decline, his income declines with them. He has one more year, he says. After that, the math of operating a car in Las Vegas, maintaining it, paying for the license and the fuel and the insurance against the income that the current passenger volume generates, stops working. The chef who has worked in strip kitchens for 2 decades has watched a more specific version of the same story. The restaurant where he works has been repositioned for the premium market. The menu is more expensive, the covers are fewer, and the kitchen operates on tighter margins per service with higher margins per table. For the restaurant's ownership, this is an improvement. For the chef, whose income is partly tied to service volume and to the gratuities that follow from it, the repositioning has meant fewer hours and lower weekly earnings, despite working in a restaurant that is nominally more successful than it was. The housing cost problem that runs beneath all of this is direct and structural. When a city invests heavily in premium amenities that attract high-income visitors and residents, property values rise. Rising property values benefit property owners. The workforce that staffs the casinos and hotels and restaurants is disproportionately a renting workforce. As the premium amenities attract wealthier investors and part-time residents, the housing costs that the service workforce faces rise, and the margin between what service work pays and what a habitable housing situation costs narrows. San Francisco is the canonical version of this experiment. A city that built a globally competitive technology industry became enormously wealthy in aggregate, and in doing so became effectively unaffordable for the workers who staff its restaurants and provide its care services. The wealth concentrated at the top, the cost distributed broadly. Las Vegas is executing the same experiment on a compressed timeline driven by explicit corporate strategic decisions rather than by the accumulating effects of an organic economic transformation. The workers who have watched this happen to their city are not abstract statistics. They are people who came to Las Vegas on a specific understanding that a service industry skill set, applied with diligence and reliability, could support a reasonable life in a city that was growing and prosperous and that needed what they had to offer. That understanding was not always perfectly realized. Service work has always been physically demanding, irregularly scheduled, and sensitive to tourism cycles, but there was a baseline expectation that if enough tourists came and spent money, the money would flow broadly enough to sustain the community that made the tourist experience possible. That baseline expectation is now under pressure it has not faced in the city's modern history. What Las Vegas teaches. The broader American economy has been running the experiment that Las Vegas is currently completing. Las Vegas is useful because it makes the result visible to anyone who walks through the city with attention. The casino operators have found a way to generate more revenue from fewer customers. This is a success by every metric that appears in an earnings report. What the earnings report does not measure is the Uber driver accumulating idle hours at the airport, or the chef running fewer covers per service, or the Elvis impersonator conducting 6 ceremonies a week where he used to conduct 6 per day. Those facts do not appear on a balance sheet. They appear in the commute times and savings accounts and the eventual decisions of people who conclude they cannot continue. The argument that the market has spoken, that the casino industry's pivot to premium customers reflects a legitimate response to customer demand, has real validity as a description of mechanism. No organization is obligated to serve below-market customers. Shareholders are legally entitled to have their interests prioritized. Quarterly returns are the metric the system requires. The counterargument is that Las Vegas did not develop its competitive position in a vacuum. The roads and the power infrastructure and the regulatory framework that allows casinos to operate at scale were built by the people who live and work in the city, including the workers who now find themselves priced out of the experience they helped construct. The implicit social contract of the city that was built was that its prosperity would be broadly distributed. The redesign has concentrated the prosperity while distributing the costs across a much broader population. The long-term sustainability of this model is a genuine question that the quarterly earnings reports do not pose, because quarterly earnings reports are not designed to ask questions about decades. The mass-market tourists who used to come twice a year or 4 times a year provided a form of economic stability. They came in good economic times, and they came adjusting their budgets, but not eliminating their trips entirely in difficult ones. They were the base load of the Las Vegas economy. The premium customers who have replaced them are more economically volatile, more sensitive to asset markets, more inclined to spend freely when conditions favor them, and more likely to pull back sharply when conditions change. A city calibrated entirely for the top 10% of the income distribution is uniquely exposed when anything disrupts the prosperity of that group. The wealthy have had a remarkable run. That run is not guaranteed to continue indefinitely. The payoff. The Elvis impersonator is still there. His chapel is still decorated the same way it was when he opened it. The velvet on the pews, the photographs of previous couples on the wall, hundreds of them, ordinary people from ordinary places who came to Las Vegas and wanted something they could remember. The rhinestone jumpsuit still fits. He has not changed what he is offering. The market that found it valuable has moved. He is a real-time instrument measuring the discretionary spending capacity of the American middle and working class, and what his numbers show is that the capacity has declined. 6 per day to 6 per week is not a story about one business in one city. It is a data point in a national pattern that shows up in credit card delinquency rates and savings rates and consumer confidence surveys and the 2025 Las Vegas visitor statistics and the quarterly earnings calls of companies that are doing well precisely because the people like his customers are doing worse. The casinos are thriving. The workers are not. The Uber driver has 1 year left. The chef is running fewer covers. The entertainer who has served the city's broad tourist base for 2 decades is serving a fraction of the customers he used to serve. The city that was built to make everyone feel special for a weekend is now very efficient at making some people feel extremely special and not quite sure what to offer everyone else. Las Vegas was built on a bet. The bet was specific. Ordinary people want to feel extraordinary. They will pay a modest price to feel that way, and a city built on that premise can support a broad and prosperous community of people who make the experience possible. For decades, the bet paid out across the board. The workers earned, the entertainers worked. The small businesses served the flow of people who kept coming because the city was genuinely accessible. Then someone ran the numbers and concluded that a smaller bet on richer players produced better arithmetic. The conclusion was correct. It is better arithmetic. It has produced stronger quarterly earnings and more favorable investor calls, and a Las Vegas that, by the financial metrics used to measure it, is doing very well. The volcano at the Mirage was free. It is gone. The pirate battle was free. It is gone. The white tigers were free. They are gone. The view from the overpass near the Formula One circuit was free. It was blocked. Each decision was rational in isolation. Together they describe a city that has removed, systematically and deliberately, the things that made it a place for everyone, in order to become a more profitable place for fewer people. The optimization worked. Something was lost anyway. It is usually only later, when the optimization is complete and the thing that was lost cannot be recovered, that anyone attempts to calculate what was removed along with the inefficiency. What happens in Vegas no longer stays in Vegas. It follows you home as a lesson in what an economy becomes when it decides to optimize for the people at the top and count the costs to everyone else as externalities. The Elvis impersonator will close his chapel when the numbers stop working. The quarterly earnings call will not mention it. The annual tourism report will show a floor that is holding. No one will note what is standing on it, or what it cost to build, or what it will cost when it is gone. The history of Las Vegas as a cultural institution is inseparable from the history of American aspiration in the post-war decades. The country that emerged from World War II had a specific relationship to pleasure and excess. A generation that had survived the Depression and the war had earned, or felt it had earned, the right to spend. The gross domestic product was growing. The middle class was expanding. The highway system was being built. And in the middle of the Nevada desert, a city was being constructed whose entire purpose was to absorb the surplus energy and disposable income of a prosperous population. The affordability of Las Vegas in this era was not incidental. It was the point. The casino operators understood that the American middle class was the largest pool of potential customers in the world, and that serving it required pricing calibrated to its actual income, not to its aspirational self-image. A factory worker from Detroit could come to Las Vegas, stay in a decent room, eat a steak dinner that cost less than his daily wage, see Frank Sinatra perform in the same room where the company owner who signed his paycheck was sitting, and go home having spent a week's pay on an experience that felt like a different life. That feeling of temporary access to a world slightly above your normal circumstances was the product that Las Vegas was selling. The gambling was the mechanism. The feeling was the thing. Howard Hughes, who began buying strip properties in 1966 and 1967, represented the first significant test of whether the model would survive a change in ownership philosophy. Hughes was famously reclusive, bacteriophobic, and indifferent to the experiential logic that had built the properties he was purchasing. He lived on an upper floor of the Desert Inn while he owned it and sent representatives to conduct business he was unwilling to conduct in person. He brought legitimacy to the industry in the eyes of Nevada regulators who preferred a known eccentric billionaire to the organized crime figures whose tax compliance and regulatory cooperation had been unreliable. But Hughes was not an operator. He was an accumulator. The model survived him because the people who actually ran his properties understood it better than he did. The model did not survive the era of publicly traded consolidation, not because the corporations that inherited it were malicious, but because the metrics they were optimizing for were incompatible with the model's logic. The original model optimized for volume of customers and total gambling revenue. The corporate model optimized for revenue per customer, margin per square foot, and earnings per share. These produced different decisions. The original model said, make everything around the gambling as accessible and appealing as possible to as many people as possible. The corporate model said, identify the most profitable segment of customers and design the experience around their preferences and their budget, because optimizing for them produces better numbers than optimizing for the many. The free attractions disappeared one by one because each individual decision to remove or monetize them made financial sense in isolation. The volcano at the Mirage was expensive to maintain and generated no direct revenue. Its function was to attract foot traffic that would then convert into gambling revenue, but the conversion rate was not directly measurable, and unmeasurable returns are difficult to defend in a quarterly earnings presentation. The white tigers were expensive to house and care for. The Treasure Island Pirate Show required staff and maintenance. In each case, the question asked was not, what does this contribute to the experience of Las Vegas as a whole? But what does this contribute to our measurable revenue? The answers to those two questions pointed in different directions, and the one that pointed toward a cleaner balance sheet won. The resort fee is the purest symbol of this transition. A resort fee is a charge for things that were previously free, presented as a fee rather than a price increase, because presenting it as a fee allows the room rate to appear lower in search results, which attracts customers who then discover the actual total cost at checkout or on their credit card statement. It is, in the most precise sense, a deceptive pricing mechanism. It has been the subject of regulatory scrutiny in multiple states and multiple court challenges, and it has survived all of them because the casino operators are large enough to absorb legal challenges, and because the fee has become so universal that eliminating it would require the entire industry to coordinate a simultaneous reduction that none of the major players has any individual incentive to initiate. The resort fee is also a class signal. It is not noticeable to a customer spending several $1,000s on a room. It is very noticeable to a customer spending $200 on a room. At $200 per night, plus $55 in resort fees, plus parking charges, plus minibar charges, the Las Vegas weekend that once cost a working family a manageable amount has become something that requires a different calculation than it used to. The housing cost crisis in Las Vegas is worth examining in more specific detail because it is the mechanism through which the K-economy's effects on workers are most concretely experienced in their daily lives. Las Vegas has historically been an affordable city, by the standards of major American metros. The cost of living, particularly housing, was manageable on service industry wages in a way that made the city genuinely accessible, not just as a tourist destination, but as a place to build a life. A casino dealer, a hotel housekeeper, a restaurant cook could afford a reasonable apartment within a commutable distance from the Strip on the wages those jobs paid. That calculation has changed substantially. Home prices in the Las Vegas metro area more than doubled in the decade following the 2012 housing recovery. Rental costs followed. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Las Vegas reached levels that consume more than 40% of the take-home pay of many service workers, which is the threshold at which housing economists consider a household to be housing cost burdened. A household paying 40% or more of its income on housing has essentially no margin for unexpected expenses, no capacity for savings, and is one moderate financial setback away from a cascade of consequences that are very difficult to recover from. The workers who are most exposed to this are the same workers who make the Las Vegas premium experience possible. The housekeepers who maintain the rooms that high-end guests pay thousands of dollars per night to occupy. The cooks who prepare the dishes at the celebrity chef restaurants that anchor the casino floors. The valets who park the cars of guests arriving from the private jet terminal. These workers are not peripheral to the Las Vegas economy. They are its operational foundation. The premium experience that generates the strong quarterly earnings is not possible without them, and the premium experience's success has made it significantly harder for them to continue living in the city where they provide that labor. This is not unique to Las Vegas. San Francisco, New York, Miami, and Boston have all experienced versions of the same dynamic. A city invests in amenities that attract high-income residents and high-end businesses. Property values rise, and the workforce that staffs the service economy finds itself progressively squeezed out of the city that depends on their labor. In San Francisco, the technology industry's growth produced municipal prosperity at the aggregate level and acute housing crisis at the level of the service worker. In Las Vegas, the casino industry's pivot to premium has produced the same pattern in a compressed time frame. The difference is that Las Vegas was built explicitly on the premise of broad accessibility. San Francisco did not present itself as a city for everyone. Las Vegas did. The loss of that premise is not just an economic phenomenon, it is a rupture with the city's foundational identity. The Culinary Union, which represents tens of thousands of Las Vegas casino and hotel workers, has documented the deterioration in its members' ability to afford housing near their workplaces. Workers who have held their positions for 10 or 15 years, who have built careers in the industry, who have accumulated seniority and expertise and relationships, are increasingly living in the outer suburbs of the Las Vegas Valley or in adjacent communities, spending hours commuting to jobs in buildings they can no longer afford to live near. The service that generates the billions in quarterly revenue is being provided by people for whom the city providing those billions has become economically hostile. The executives who run the casino corporations are generally aware of this. In interviews and investor presentations, some acknowledge the workforce housing challenge as a real concern. The acknowledgement rarely translates into action because the action required, investing in workforce housing or advocating for zoning policies that would enable more affordable housing construction would produce costs that appear on the balance sheet, while the benefits would appear in the community and in the long-term resilience of the labor supply, neither of which is measured by the metrics that quarterly earnings require. The broader American parallel to what Las Vegas has done is visible across multiple industries, and understanding it matters because Las Vegas is not an exception. It is an accelerated case study. The airline industry ran the same experiment. The major carriers spent the better part of 2 decades stripping the amenities that had once made air travel bearable for economy passengers, introducing fees for checked luggage, for seat selection, for early boarding, for meals that were previously included, while simultaneously expanding and improving the premium cabin experience for their highest value customers. The logic was identical to the casino logic. The top tier of frequent flyers generates revenue that exceeds, on a per-seat basis, what economy passengers generate by margins that make the economy cabin increasingly an afterthought. The result is an experience that is genuinely better for the passengers at the front of the plane and genuinely worse for the passengers at the back of it, and a business model that considers this an acceptable outcome because the profitable passengers are the ones at the front. The entertainment industry has followed the same path. Ticket prices for major concerts have risen at rates that significantly exceed inflation, driven by a realization similar to the one that drove the casino operators. The audience for major artists includes a significant percentage of high-income fans who will pay substantially more than the previous market price for premium access, and optimizing for those fans produces better aggregate revenue than optimizing for a broader audience at more accessible prices. The floor of a major stadium concert, which once cost a moderate amount, now costs several $100s. The general admission area that put working-class music fans in proximity to the performers they loved has been replaced by tiered pricing structures that price based on proximity and desirability rather than on what a broad fan base can afford. In each case, the business logic is identical. Find the segment that will pay the most. Design the experience for that segment. Allow or encourage the other segments to self-select out. The financial result is better margins. The social result is the progressive exclusion of middle and working-class consumers from experiences that were previously considered broadly accessible. Las Vegas is the most visible and most concentrated version of this experiment because Las Vegas is a city built entirely around an industry, and the transformation of that industry is therefore the transformation of the city itself. When the airline industry optimizes for premium passengers, the economy passengers still fly. They just fly worse. When Las Vegas optimizes for premium tourists, the budget tourists do not come to a worse version of Las Vegas. They simply do not come, and the workers who depended on them find themselves in a city that is doing well by its preferred customers and indifferent, in the most structural sense, to everyone else. The Elvis impersonator, the Uber driver, the chef, the culinary union member commuting from the outer suburbs. They are not isolated casualties of an inevitable transition. They are the people who absorbed the cost of an optimization decision that they had no voice in and no protection from. The decision was made in boardrooms and investment committee meetings and quarterly earnings presentations. The consequences were distributed across a workforce and a community that did not attend those meetings and are not represented in the metrics that drove the decisions. This is what the K economy feels like from the inside of one of its clearest examples, not a chart, not a statistic. The rhinestone jumpsuit that still fits in a chapel that is still there, serving a fraction of the people it used to serve. The couples who used to come are not gone because Las Vegas failed them. Las Vegas succeeded at something, and they were not the beneficiaries of the success.